Hello, I'm a student of Bhikkhu Candana. This is just a reminder that he is a homeless monk, depending entirely on donations to live and share the Dhamma. If you want to help support Bhante, our teacher, please consider donating to this cause. Thank you and enjoy.
Dhamma greetings, Bhante. Thank you for your time. There are a few questions I've received from the community, the public, and I would like to take this opportunity to ask them. So the first question has to do with your prolific Dhamma sharing online on YouTube, and people have been wondering, how does Bhante do this work? Is there a team of students, supporters helping you, Bhante, or are you doing all of this work on your own? If you could shed some light on the process of putting the Dhamma online, what it's like for you.
Yeah, it's I've mentioned this before, it's a labor of love. I find myself in a very privileged position in time, in history, to have access to be born at a time when there is the Dhamma still. When I say the Dhamma, I mean the Pāli canon. For me, it has been a vast world where we still have intact whatever that has survived through the ages, over the course of 26 centuries of Lord Buddha's teachings that he left us with. So we are very privileged today as human beings, those of us who have come to the Dhamma, and also to have had the privilege of studying and putting the effort and time in learning Pāli, in studying over the years, since the 90s in my case, where although I was not allowed to become a bhikkhu, given the absence of the permission from my father, nevertheless I was able to do the work, the academic work, and learn the language as well as the Dhamma from then on. So now I see that the work is quite vast as well. The amount of work that it has, it entails. Now the thing is, back in the 90s even, when I started officially embarking on this journey of discovery of the Suttas, I was already studying the other sutras and the Mahayana and also Vajrayana texts and things. However, finally, when I went back to the earliest teachings of Lord Buddha, back in those days, the new publications were coming out. This was not the Pāli Text Society version, but Wisdom Publications, which was just newly established publication based out of the US, and then they also had the different branches. However, they were very expensive, plus the PTS version, the Pāli Text Society's version, was pretty antiquated terms in there. So I was not finding it very appealing to the modern English speaker. It wasn't reaching me, despite my efforts in studying. And then the new versions that were coming out, there were chunks and chunks and chunks of material that I felt very disappointed in the fact that the suttas were missing. They were not in there. There was a lot of ellipses, dots. But no one had anything, no one could do anything about it, I thought. So I had my own limiting beliefs, as most people. But I didn't feel like I can do anything about it. So what many people were struggling with, and I was really frustrated and struggling with this myself, was I had to go back and forth, because within parentheses you would find a section or some instructions on part of the writer, translator, that has the reader go back and refer back to some other sutta, and you have to go on a wild goose chase almost in some cases, in many cases. Now, fast forward by a few decades and you have the internet versions, so you have many new, I'm glad to say, that's another thing of us being fortunate, all of us, to be living at a time period where you have many individuals who are doing translations. Good or bad, that's different. But at least they are available in some form or the other. So there was still dissatisfaction. I was facing a lot of uncomfortable situations, and I have noticed that over time when I would give, let's say, the thick, Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, or Anguttara Nikaya to students, hey, you need to read this. They would go, Bhante, look at the size of, actually, I wasn't a Bhante then. They would say, but look at the size of that volume. I don't have time to read. I don't have this. So this is what led me to say, okay, why don't I start with something small? Now, what I'm referring to is narrations. That's how it began. It didn't start as translations. It started as, okay, how could I make it so that my students could go ahead and, not just my students, but anyone, to be able to hear the suttas being narrated. At that time, there was none, to my knowledge, online, or some method. There were commentaries available. I know that Bhikkhu Bodhi had this wonderful collection of Majjhima Nikaya commentaries that he had done up in Ithaca, New York, which were amazing at the time because they allowed a glimpse. So you saw the translator's comments on a specific sutta, let's say, and it was available on MP3s and things. So that was good, but those were commentaries. I was thinking of just purely the material. In this case, what I began with, the original ones were the Udana and Itiruptaka collection by John D. Ireland from Kandy, Buddhist Publication Society's version. So I felt the need to do it, and of course for free. And at the time, I didn't have. I tried reaching out to them. I sent emails and things, and I didn't get any responses. But I felt that time is running out, and I have to do something, and it's not for sale. It's not going to be for sale. So it's the Dhamma, and the Dhamma is free. So what I did was, at that time, I just started to narrate using the laptop I had. I was a layman, so I didn't have the whole, microphone set up and all that. So I started with the Udana because of one specific sutta which had been with me since I came across it, and it's the Bahya Sutta from the Udana. And I said, I have to make this sutta available to all. All those people who don't even know the Pāli suttas, they don't know anything about the Buddha's teachings, etc., etc. Different groups of people. But all they had to do was hit play. So I wanted to be that liaison, and well, not the liaison, but to make it available, because there wasn't one. So I started with the Udana. I said just that portion of the book. And then I finished it, and I was like, wow, this is. There's the other book, Itivuttaka, from Lady Kujuttara's, recounting to Queen Samavati and her retinue. So anyhow, that book finished, and I said, okay, this is a small book. What's another book that I like, really, that has moved me? And it was the Dhammapada. But I didn't want to just narrate the verses, because there's so many different versions of it, of course, but I wanted to include something that has within it the background stories, if available. And the late Venerable Kesri Dhammananda's version was the one for me. So I said, but it's a vast book. It's a thick, much thicker book. And so that was a challenge. So I would record it on my laptop, and I would have the laptop with me even in my office. At the time I was a psychotherapist, and I was seeing patients, and in between sessions sometimes I would just hope that the person doesn't show up or shows up late, so I would just sit there with the laptop, and I literally would carry, because I didn't have the mic and all set up, so I would bring the laptop up to close to my mouth while I have the book in front of me, and I would flip the pages with one hand while I'm holding the laptop with my other hand and read it. Hopefully no one was walking through the hallways, no one was loud, so of course that would be rare, because oftentimes I had to stop, go back, edit, delete, add another one, so a lot of redos. And lo and behold, after some time, the Dhammapada was done. Then I said, okay, now I guess I have to start with either the Majjhima Nikaya or the Digha Nikaya. Now the problem was, as I was mentioning, many of the terminologies that have been used by translators, I didn't agree with. And I've expressed these to, pertinent or, respective translators. Shared some ideas, etc. But nevertheless, they remained. So, but I was having issues, such as one big term is the term samadhi. So, and other terms, of course. In each sutta, I saw that needed to be retouched or adjusted, fixed as per my understanding. Of course, this does not mean necessarily that the translator was wrong, this and that. This is coming from the contextual approach that I use and have been using. Now over time it has been more and more refined, and with the feedback that I have been receiving from students and listeners and all that, so all these factors came into play. And every sutta that I did with Digha Nikaya and Majjhima Nikaya and then Anguttara Nikaya, initially when I started, every sutta was being somewhat redone. However, I would be using several versions. So I would have several versions of it, and I had the actual book in some cases, if available. But again, so many of them were missing chunks and chunks of data. So what I did was I started to write down the missing parts. Go to, if I had the PDF, I would take those, but then I had to retouch those, even if they are not missing any parts, as it were. But I had to change those. So I ended up having to open a Microsoft Word file per sutta, in many cases, and I was changing the things that had to be changed because I simply didn't agree with. I don't recall any sutta that I didn't have to touch and change, in many cases completely. This is in the early stages. And this is where I can touch upon their question. Some of my students keep telling me, Bhante, you give a 360. Yeah, but I don't know of any other way of explaining. Rarely do you get a question that it's a yes and no answer. Plus, it doesn't do anything. So when you have a 360, you're allowing the person to be in that setting. Again, the contextual elements at play. So I was by myself. First of all, I thought it was such a gigantic endeavor. I didn't even think I could pull it off. This is after I had to overcome the hurdles of not being good enough. And who am I? I'm just a layman. Granted, I had my PhD in Buddhism. Granted that I'd been studying it for almost 30 years. Granted that I knew these languages. Granted that, etc., etc. But I still did not find myself qualified. Because it's such a beautiful thing. These translators' work that they're doing, I always am admiring the work that these people have done. So to come in, I didn't find myself. So finally I was like, okay, I have to do it. Somebody has to do it because I'm seeing some things that need addressing. And no one is addressing the way that I'm finding in the field as that's the other thing. As a meditation instructor and as a meditator over the course of time, there were terms. I mentioned the term that was, not working was the samadhi. To this day, you have so many translators still using the term concentration, a very, very inadequate term to describe this beautiful term, samadhi, that, to my understanding, Lord Buddha was the one who originated it. He definitely described it in such a beautiful way, but one word that has so many nuances. It's not simply concentration, although that aspect is within it, yes, but it cannot be limited into that word. And this hit home for me because I had struggled in meditation for almost over 2 decades because of that word. That's why linguistics are so powerful. They can destroy as well as build. Destroy in the sense that it was the term itself. Every time I would come, because Lord Buddha mentioned samadhi so many times, there's so many references to it in different contexts. But my brain was going to the word concentration in English, so I was like, okay, so what does come to mind when you hear the word concentrate? Narrow, focused, one-pointed, frowning, lines, intensity. But I was having a difficulty with equating that, placing that within the same sentence as, using wisdom, panya. They don't match, those two, but they match beautifully in the Pāli, in what Lord Buddha is discussing. So concentration had to be shaken, moved, unraveled, changed. So the term that I saw, I wasn't the only one using this, of course. I had individuals and even teachers from Burma and other places that were translating it in the context of collectedness of mind. So for me, collectedness of the heart, I like to use that a lot for samadhi. So this is one example that I found to be needing an overhaul in the suttas. Now, as time went on, there were so many changes that I was applying to every single sutta. That it was 2 steps forward and 3 steps back in some cases, which would set me back. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and completely retranslate. Meanwhile, I had already done Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya. Again, every single sutta was being built or redone. In some cases, completely done, because they weren't there. So you would have 1 or 2 lines for the sutta's name, and that's it. It's, in some cases it would be something. You can even see this on the internet translation websites in some cases, where as it says in this sutta, boom, gone. Meanwhile, it's several pages long, even though there's a repetition. I get it. But that whole page is blank, left blank with 1 line left in it. And meanwhile, it is codified under a separate sutta title, discourse such and such. But there's no sutta. So I said, well, if we're going to save, if we're going to preserve the Dhamma, we need to do a better job. So I was unhappy with what I was seeing. On the other hand, you also had individuals, translators, who were just taking, creative licenses with the terms that they were coming up with. Now, I was having a difficulty matching these translations, this sentence, let's say, from this sutta, from this paragraph, to the Pāli, because there are generic terms, there are, certain terms that people have been using, scholars, academicians, Pāli scholars have been using, and my professors and my teachers have been using for Pāli in English. So your brain immediately goes, where does that word? What is this? Well, lo and behold, this translator felt like this makes more sense for them. So they completely changed the term. Now you are stuck if you're a newbie, if you're if you're a newcomer, but you're curious to know the Dhamma. So that was another danger. Now, I've also addressed this to those specific translators, and there happened to be also Buddhist monks. I was a layman at the time, but they're also, very prolific writers and translators and things. So I raised this question as to, well, fine, you want to do it, but at least leave the Pāli within parentheses. But it fell on deaf ears, and I said, okay, I'm not going to judge anyone, so if they're not willing to do it, I want to do it. And so I saw that I have to really draw a color outside the lines of what was expected here, because it's mostly influenced by Western, especially postmodernist, academic tendencies, and those do more harm than good, because they will come in and clip the wings off of the Dhamma. Whatever Dhamma has somehow survived for 26 centuries, in this century, already within such a short time period, I've noticed such a damage being caused to it because of this, you can call it Western individualistic idealism and all that. So it's like, that's one of it anyhow. So I was just, something had to be done. So I started now, in addition to the narrations, to go ahead and do the entire translations. This fully came into bloom after, I think, the 3rd book of the Anguttara Nikaya, where I started to completely do complete new translations. Now, I have been using several sources. As I mentioned, PTS, I would use the Wisdom publications, which means Bhikkhu Bodhis, and also I sometimes use Sutta Centrals, but the Pāli material Mahasangiti and all that. So, and other, especially my major influence, this is important, influence of mine has been the late Venerable Bhante Katukurunde Nyanananda. And even though he doesn't have translations as such, but he has written such vast materials on pretty much every sutta, Pāli, in the Pāli canon. And his interpretations, his translations of ideas and concepts are so radically important, and they breathe life. So for me, I have been fortunate enough to have all these resources that I've been using. So, and here I can just segue back to your question, that I have been doing this work, and one day I realized that I cannot do this in between sessions, between writing, my session reports or notes, as we call it, and then just wait for it to be done so that I can just jump back in and do my translations or narrations, which I would put them on YouTube, because I didn't want it to be a burden on anyone or any one of my students once I am dead and gone, for them to pay some subscription to be able to listen to these suttas and narrations. So that's why I figured that the best platform would be YouTube. And so that's why it was more economical, feasible. So I would put the time, and I would only have to do it once. So might as well do the most perfect, most exquisite job I can, and then that's it. I don't have to revisit. So, but over the course of time, some of my students saw how difficult it was to work on my 13-inch Mac, Air laptop, and they would see how many windows I would have open, and I have to minimize this and open that, and then go back to my Windows file, and then do that there, and then go back to the Pāli, this, that. So they felt bad. So I have one student who purchased an extra screen. This was when I was in Australia recently. So that is like, Bhante, this makes your job so much better. And yes, it does, truly. And now I also use it not just for translating, but also when I'm using iMovie, let's say, to do the recordings. The other screen would have the finalized version of the translation in front, instead of having to use a simple screen. So these are some of the technical stuff that I have to do from start to finish. I also have another student who a few years ago said, Bhante, the quality of the sound, I mean, I know you're doing it well, but you best you can, but there's a lot of background noise, and it's better if it's this. And so he sent me his very modern set of equipment, like microphone, this and that, all the way from England. He purchased it, and this was when I was in Hawaii. So that has tremendously improved the quality of the sound, etc. But we can't do anything about the dogs and the neighbors and things that would be going outside. So again, the support from students has been very important and helpful, crucial. But as far as the work from start to finish, I have to take responsibility for that. A student has also been working, doing a very important work. I have a student in the UK, the same one who sent the microphone, and he's been handling the podcast, because he said a lot of times people don't like to have YouTube, because there's too many ads, this and that. So he also was willing to pay for the subscription for podcast. I don't know how it works, but you have to have a subscription, and so he has been uploading. So now I just send it off. He was even sending me the external hard drive all the way to Malaysia, where I was at the time. And I would upload series of, hundreds of suttas, including Dhamma talks, this and that, recordings of it, and ship it to him back in the UK. And he would upload it on. So now he suggested I use different internet without naming names, so he has immediately access to the files, and he could upload to podcast. And I'm glad to say that people who don't use YouTube, who use podcast, are reaching out and thanking us for the work that's being done. So, one of my students said one time, it's a one-monk operation. And yes, so, but I'm glad, because it's only one time I'm going to do it, and so might as well do the best that I can with it. And again, it's a very responsible position to be in. I can't take credit for it, and I can't make light of it. And I'm glad to say that at least portions of the suttas, which I'm also doing a sutta exploration series for some time now, for about 2 years or so, I decided to also get them the PDF files of them, and put them onto the website, mindreleased.com, in the Pāli Sutta section, where people could listen to the Dhamma talk, commentary on the sutta. Some of these suttas already are recorded, just narration without commentary, as well as the PDFs are there on the website. So you have all these resources. So all you have to do is listen, read, pay attention, and practice. But the big part is, we're so fortunate that the suttas have made it through the centuries, with those venerable ones who recited them, and got them to us. So this is a small thing that I'm doing compared to what they have, and what so many countless and nameless elders, teras, have done to get it to us. So sadhu to them.
As a follow-up to that, Bhante, if you could share how this astronomical work has been helping, contributing to, or how has it been affecting your own practice, because you're a monk, and obviously we know that posting, a YouTube video, just the process of posting a single video on YouTube takes so many steps, it takes so much time, and yet the content is Dhamma. So how have you been navigating that process in the context of your own training as a monk?
Well, Lord Buddha identified khanti, or patience, as the highest virtue. So whether uploading onto, aside from all the other steps, when you get to the point where the .mov or the video file is ready, or M4A or MP4, whatever it is, to be uploaded on YouTube or sent to be podcasted, that's another, as they say, a ball game, totally different. You forget about all the other work that you've done, which could have been a lot. But it's interesting because it teaches you to always have, so long as you've truly been paying attention. It teaches you to stay with the Dhamma, to have the Dhamma stay with you. I oftentimes remind students, hold the hand of Sati. Hold the hand of Sati with you. So it's key to remember, this is not just some work we're doing. This is not just some life we're living. Whether you're a bhikkhu, you're not, you're a layperson, it really, the work really essentially doesn't have much to do with that when you think of it. What I mean by that is you could be a bhikkhu or a layperson and not be a practitioner, someone who's really doing the training. So the key thing is to carry the training with you no matter what. So yes, it can be daunting. It's oftentimes I just hit a brick wall. I don't know where to go because there's too many obstacles, or the format, or the iMovie changes, or YouTube changes at something, or I get stuck. Like when I was doing the website, I didn't have anyone to help me. How do I post a video? How do I do this? How do I, for example, every time I put a PDF onto the website, I have to write down, actually, I tell myself I have to write it down, the steps. I keep forgetting. There's so many tedious steps that I have to go through. For example, if it's bold letters, the word, it's done in bold letters. And then you have italics, not in bold. There's different things you have to do. It's a little bit more complex than just using, let's say, a Word document, program or platform. So anyhow, it's all enhancing the practice. That's how one has to look at it. Because these are not just translations. These are not just narrations. These are not just uploading of those things. Everything has to be about the practice. So absolutely, the suttas have changed me. As I mentioned, I was a layman when I started this journey. And look at me now. I had hair. I had a collection of ties, bow ties, this and that, collection of suits, different colors, pants, shoes, watches. Never looked back. The Dhamma is real. The Dhamma is beyond beautiful. So when you read the suttas, there was a reason why I've been urging people to read, but then I saw how the busy life of today, the modern person living in the world like this, so hectic, so tense. So they could listen to something on the road to work or back from school or something. They could listen while they're working out, doing something. So I would also listen to the talks, to the narrations, to the suttas and things. And it would really change me, because it's not my voice I'm hearing, it's the suttas. It's Lord Buddha's words that are coming through. And the situations. The context. All the relational aspects of things that are happening. Why did Lord Buddha say this? To this person, to this crowd, at this time. And what could be the meaning of these statements in this context compared to other places, because you have the same title maybe, or the same individuals in that scene as well as this. But why? And then how could this affect my practice? So this is when you remove yourself from the 21st century and place yourself there. Or you bring the 26th century-old scene from India to you, to the city that you live in, your situation, circumstances in life. And all of a sudden it becomes alive, it becomes pertinent, it becomes relatable. So the Dhamma is sanditthiko. It is immediately effective. It is timeless, akaliko, beyond time. Immediately effective. It doesn't have you waste time. So all you have to do is have access to it. And that's what I'm trying to do. In the best way I know how. The best way possible. So absolutely they have changed my perspective on so many things. All the stuff that you would think you learn in academic circles, I would just laugh at them because, you know, the academic arena, the papers, countless, the dissertations, theses and all that, compared to the practice, compared to the suttas, just reading one sutta fully, just life-changing. It is no wonder that so many people would come to Lord Buddha and listen to him. They would attain. People in the 21st century believe that those were just added later. They were just inspired. The writers were inspired. Because these are such lofty states that no one can attain them, especially now. That's complete disservice to the Dhamma, to Lord Buddha. So the Dhamma is very much alive, and you do, if you pay attention to it, whether you read it, listen to it, it will affect your life. It will affect your life. There's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, and where it's a famous sutta, and I'm actually I haven't translated it yet, but it's Sarakani sutta, and Lord Buddha is being asked, almost one would say interrogated by some of his cousins and, you know, the Sakyans who are upset about something that Lord Buddha has said about one of their own who died. And Lord Buddha said that person actually is, you know, in a higher realm. And how could he this and that? And Lord Buddha basically, I'm paraphrasing here, said, why are you surprised? Look at these solid trees, he says. If these solid trees, they're beautiful trees by the way, if these were to be able to understand words and concepts, what I'm trying to teach, if they would understand the words, they too would become noble disciples, he says. So why are you surprised? Imagine a tree. Lord Buddha is saying this. He's saying, even the trees would become Arya Savakas had they understood Pāli, had they understood basically what he was teaching, the words. So all we have to do is pay attention. That's what he's saying. Because these trees are there. They're not going to run away. But time is running away from us. And Dhamma is still available. What's your excuse? Of course you could attain. Of course people can attain. So long as they haven't harmed or killed their mother or father, they haven't harmed a Buddha or spilled or harmed an Arahant, they haven't done any of those things, similar things, they're fine, they could attain. because you still have a human body. You're alive. So that's what this whole endeavor is for. Yes, to preserve the Dhamma in a way where it is. The Pāli terms are being said, if they're in there. They're being translated, and people could hear it. People could relate to it. Recently, I also retranslated. That was a big project. The Sutta Nipata, which I didn't want to touch for over 20-some years, because it's all verses. And ever since I was a teenager, I never liked verses. So I had my bias against that. But there was so much like beautiful things, and this is where Bhante Jnanananda really came to the rescue. Because when I was narrating Bhante Jnanananda's law of dependent arising, and I only did that because the late Venerable didn't have the strength to finish. Well, he only narrated the 33 sermons, and but he did the writing, he did give the sermons in all these other books, but he was too weak to narrate them himself, because you do find his narrations of the 33, which is a treasure. So that was when I was also doing the dependent arising, his sermons, 20 of them. I would come up, come across, his references to the Sutta Nipata. I was like, okay, Bhante, okay, I get it. And then I started with one verse, second verse, again verse, some other verse, and this, I was like, okay, I have to do the whole thing. So I'm glad to say that about a few months ago I finished the Sutta Nipata, and it's now completely done in PDF, and some of my students are trying to have the seed money for it to be printed, so we could have it be published basically and given to people free of charge, of course, because the Dhamma cannot be sold. And that's another thing which I had an issue with years ago, when I saw people selling the Dhamma. That is never appropriate. So that's why I will never be able to, I will never want to have any of the Dhamma that I share be sold. It is priceless. So, yes.
Thank you, Bhante, for your time and wisdom.
Thank you.